Well, let me, for the 15th time, welcome you this morning. We are so glad that you're here. And right before we get into the message, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge our graduates today. If you graduated from like high school or college or a graduate program or kindergarten, because they do kindergarten graduations now, I hear, with the whole regalia, man, just wave your hand and let us clap for you. You're heroes in your own right today. So congratulations for that. God bless you as you move on to the next chapter, whatever that might be. But I've been enjoying this series so far. This is week 3, and Zach kicked it off 2 weeks ago. There we go. Talking about King Josiah, and Aaron last week spoke about Gideon, and they were just two men who at the opportune moment made a choice to do the next right thing. And it was that choice, that decision, that rose them from the ranks of the ordinary to the rank of hero. And so today I'm super excited to talk to you about one of my personal heroes, and that would be Queen Esther. And what we're going to call her is Esther, a woman of quiet heroism. Now, if you're not familiar with the book of Esther, I would encourage you. It's 10 chapters long. It's not that long. It's manageable for a sitting. It is like a biblical soap opera. It is crazy. If you think the Bible's boring, you've not ever read Esther. Somebody said to me this morning, I just finished reading Esther this week. And he says, I have to tell you, after the book of Chronicles, it was a much needed refresher, So, yeah, it has, the book of Esther has murder plots and genocide and lots of drinking and left turns when you should be going right and a national beauty pageant. I mean, it's just a crazy book, something you might not typically expect to sit down when you read the Word of God. But it's a great book. We're not going to go into all the details of it today. But what I want to do to get us started is introduce you to the main characters for our consideration today. They're not all the characters in the book of Esther, but they're the ones that we're going to talk about. Okay, so let's meet a few of them. First, we have King Xerxes. He is king of this massive, massive Persian empire. He is vicious. He is not a good guy. He's a drunk. He is power hungry, because you don't get to be the king of a massive empire if you're not a little power hungry. And he is a total womanizer. So he's the king, but he's really not all that wonderful. He's just the king, all right? And in addition to King Xerxes, we have Vashti. Vashti is Mrs. Xerxes, and she is the queen of the empire, as our story in the book of Esther opens up. She is a minor yet pivotal character. It's because of what happens to Vashti that Esther even enters our story. And she is soon going to be banished from the kingdom because she dared defy one of her drunken husband's drunken orders. So she's going to get kicked out of the kingdom here real soon. All right? Next, we have Hegai. Hegai is the overseer of the king's harem, and he is a eunuch. Not a word we use a lot these days, but a eunuch is someone who has been castrated, and anybody who was overseeing any part of the king's harem was going to end up being a eunuch, so there would be no shenanigans with the ladies in the harem, okay? I don't know what guys signed up for that job. If it was like a reward or a punishment, I don't know. But Hegai is our eunuch overseeing the harem that Esther's going to end up in. Then we have Mordecai. Mordecai is a devout Jew who is living in Susa, which is the capital city of this massive Persian empire. He has become the legal guardian or the father figure to Esther, who has become an orphan. And last but not least, of course, we have Esther, a young Jewish orphan, as I just said. She is living in exile in Susa with her guardian father figure, Mordecai. And she is, by the way, an absolutely stunningly beautiful woman. It becomes important later on in the story, but she is absolutely a beauty. So along with this book of Esther being soap opera and carrying with it all kind of the bad things we can associate with soap operas, the drinking and the lack of morals and all those things, which there are plenty of, running throughout the book of Esther is also this thread of courage and salvation, as it does with all of us, doesn't it? All the good and the bad of our life, if we are a Jesus follower, in our lives runs this thread of courage and salvation, and that's where we're going to focus our attention this morning. So let me give you a quick synopsis of the book of Esther so we have a little context as to why Esther is, in my opinion, a hero, all right? So Xerxes is ruling this vast Persian empire, which includes within the empire all the Jews living there as a result of the previous Babylonian exile that you'll find throughout history. The Jewish nation just gets kicked out from one place to the next. And so they had been in Babylonia, they were exiled, and now they are living in this Persian kingdom. Xerxes is a drinker. As I said, he loves to give very elaborate banquets just to show off his wealth. He has way more money than sense. Never a good combination, right? And these banquets that he likes to throw to show off to people just give him another reason to drink to excess, which he does frequently. And at the end of at one of these banquets, this one having lasted 180 days, that's 6 months, people. 6-month banquet of revelry, shall we say, has just happened. And at the end of this banquet, Xerxes calls for his wife, Queen Vashti, who is in a different part of the palace, to come to the banquet hall where King Xerxes has been drinking with his royal advisors and his friends for 6 months. And he wants her to come show off her beauty in front of all of his drunk friends. And there's a whole nother little subplot around all of what that meant for Vashti. But she didn't do it. She defied the king's order. She wouldn't come parade herself around in front of his friends. So he banishes her from the kingdom. Well, that's a problem because now the king has no queen, and we can't have that, right? There has to be a queen. So the royal advisors, also probably a little hungover themselves, decide the way to solve the problem is to hold a national beauty pageant. All right, so all the people, all the women, the advisors and whoever else the king decides to send out are going to have the task of going throughout the empire, bringing back the most beautiful women to be a part of the king's harem, one of them eventually replacing the queen who has been banished. But none of these women were going to do this voluntarily. These were women that were going to be stolen from their homes and stolen from their families in order to come live in the palace. They would undergo 12 months of intensive beauty treatments, whatever that meant back in that day. Cosmetics, very strict diet. But 12 months of whatever they were put through, having just been torn away from their homes and their families, with the end goal being one night with a vicious, drunken, womanizing, power-hungry tyrant. That's the prize, okay? And even if you were called to the king, everybody goes once, and you'll never go back again unless the king calls for you by name. But these women that are never called back don't get to go home. They are now part of the king's harem forever because they are his property to be used at his whim and his discretion. So here is Esther, our poor little Jewish orphan girl who is stunningly beautiful, thrown into this really horrible situation with the grand prize being one night with a vicious king. Awesome. But instead of being bitter or angry or living in a attitude of I'm a victim here, this is not right, which she would have been absolutely correct in saying that, Esther displays something very different. Right from the get-go, Esther catches the attention of Haggai. Remember, our overseer of the harem? He obviously sees that she is physically beautiful, but he sees something else in Esther that catches his attention and draws him. So right away, he gets her the best food. He gets her the best place in the harem. The Bible tells us, I don't know what exactly that means, but the best place in the harem, the best food, the best cosmetics, the best clothing, the best of everything. Because Esther displayed a demeanor and a spirit that was so different from the other women that were there. She was gracious and kind, and it was that demeanor that set her apart. We're told the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women, and he ultimately named her as the new queen, replacing Vashti. But keep in mind that even though the new queen, Esther, will never again be in the presence of the king unless he calls for her. She would never go back. It was the law. To come uninvited into the king's throne room was punishable by death. So even the queen could not see the king unless he called for her by name. Now, as all this is going on in the palace, the 12 months of beauty treatments and all the things that go along with getting ready for your one night with the king, Mordecai is still living in Susa. He's kind of under the radar throughout this beginning part of the story, but we know that he's able to keep in contact with Esther through third parties that communicate back and forth, because he's not going in the palace. He's a Jew in exile. They're not letting him in, all right? So Esther's here doing her thing with all the ladies and the overseers and the eunuchs, and Mordecai's out here keeping an eye and an ear on what's going on in the palace. And through another series of events that we don't have time to go into today, while Mordecai's out here doing his thing, he finds out that there is a plot to annihilate the entire Jewish nation living in this Persian Empire. All of them. There is an advisor very close to King Xerxes, who is no Jim himself, who hates Mordecai, hates him, and has projected that hatred onto the entire Jewish population. Jews were never the favored group anywhere they went. And so this disdain and this detest that was directly at Mordecai just got projected onto the Jews, and it became a genocide plot, plain and simple. They were plotting to kill them all. And Mordecai realizes Esther could be the solution to this problem of the potential annihilation of all the Jews. And it's out of this context when Mordecai realizes that Esther might be the solution that we get one of the most famous quotes in all the Bible. Who knows but you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. You've heard that quote, I'm sure. This is the context. It's craziness. In the midst of this crazy, crazy story, this beautiful orphaned Jewish girl trying to figure out life in the palace, and her uncle's telling her, hey, maybe you're here for just this reason, to be able to save your people. And you know what, though? In the story, spoiler alert, she does it. She ends up saving the entire Jewish nation. But that's jumping ahead, all right? The whole story is kind of unbelievable and crazy if it were not for God. Our stories might not be that dramatic or that dramatic, but they would be unbelievable, wouldn't they, if it were not for God? God continues to work. We just sang it. God, you were the same God then as you are now. He continues to work with and through and among his people in the same kind of way. Did you know that Esther is one of only 2 books in the Bible where the name of God never appears? Did you know that? Do you know what the other one is? Song of Solomon. If you've ever read, have you guys read the book of Song of Solomon lately? Yeah, go home and read it. You'll not find it surprising that God's name doesn't appear in the Song of Solomon, and we'll just let it go at that. But even though the name of God doesn't ever appear in the book of Esther, he is so clearly present in every situation and circumstance, and left turn, right turn, blindsided. God is clearly at work through this cast of crazy characters, most of whom don't even acknowledge him, working out his plan and his will. Esther means star, which is kind of fitting because she's the star of this book and she's the heroine of our story. And so there's a lot of wonderful things I could say about Esther, well, a lot, but we're going to look at 5 of them today. And we're going to talk about the 5 characteristics of a heroine. And number 1 characteristic, Esther displayed a charming grace and elegance. Now, before I go on here, men, please don't check out, okay? I'm talking about a woman, grace, elegance, all the things. Men, you can be graceful and elegant. Please give it a shot, see how it goes. So all these things that we kind of think of as being maybe more feminine, it's not true. Take them and apply them to you however you can, and just be a better person. But Esther displayed a charming grace and elegance. And we read that now the young lady, Esther, pleased him, Hegai, her eunuch overseer, and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. In this verse, the literal translation of the original language says this: she lifted up grace before his face. I love that. Isn't that beautiful? Her grace and her elegance were both internal and external. Even though this orphan girl had been brought to the harem completely against her will, kidnapped away or stolen away essentially from everything she knew and loved, she didn't live with a victim mentality or a bitter spirit. No, instead she lifted up grace before the faces of the people who were now in charge of her life. She modeled grace and elegance in front of the king's most influential servants. Her demeanor set her apart from the other women in the harem who were all vying for the king's attention. They all wanted to be the winner of more than one night with the king, because this is where they're going to be stuck now for the rest of their life. But Esther refused to be catty or vindictive or bitter or competitive. She lifted up grace before the faces of those who were now in charge of running her life. We read a little bit further on in this same chapter. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Xerxes to his royal palace. This is her one night with the king. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Esther had that something about her that caused everyone to find favor with her, she was admired universally by all, in the eyes of all who saw her. Nobody disagreed. Did you ever see it's an old commercial, but now I hear it's a new song too. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful. Did you ever meet somebody that was just so perfect? I just want to be mad at them, but you can't really find anything to be mad at them about. They're beautiful and kind and that was Esther. She found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Esther brought the gift of an unanxious presence everywhere she went. She was never frazzled. She never appeared to be in a hurry or stressed out or mandating behaviors from other people. She was gracious and elegant. She was beautiful inside and outside. One author has described Esther as being winsome. That's not a word we use very much anymore, but Webster defines winsomeness this way. I'll just tell you what it is. Winsomeness is being pleasant, delightful, attractive in a sweet, engaging way. Now, I will deny this, but I think Drew is winsome. Isn't he? That's not just a girl thing. Winsome people, they just win you. They're charming. You want to be around them. You want to be like them. They're energizing to you. And that's how Esther was. Even in the midst of a terrible circumstance, having no family around her except Mordecai somewhere out there, No family around, being ripped from her home in the midst of all these women vying for the king's attention. Esther chose a different way. Number 2 quality about Esther. Esther exhibited unusual restraint and self-control. In Esther 2:10, this is what we read about her. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred. Remember, she is a Jew in danger of being killed as well, should the king's mandate be carried out. For Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. Esther's ability to restrain herself in the midst of the craziness going on around her is just fascinating to me, especially her verbal restraint. As you read through the book, you find out Esther knows a lot more than she lets on. She could keep a secret. She was the perfect confidant. Esther knew when to speak up, and Esther knew when to shut up. I think that's kind of a lost art today. I think we live in a culture right now that somehow it's like virtuous or for the sake of honesty and authenticity. Just what's on your mind, just say it. Sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes you shouldn't say everything that comes through your brain because it's not all great. My father, in my grown-up years, said this to me, I don't know how many times. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Dad. And I'm going to attribute that quote to him. It's probably incorrect. Just because I can. All right. My father said that to me over and over and over. You can do just about anything. You can say just about anything. It doesn't mean you should. And it reminds me of another old saying, maybe you've heard it. It says, better to keep quiet and let people think you a fool than to open your mouth and prove it. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just stop talking. Okay? It's a good lesson. Esther knew when to speak up. Esther knew when to stop talking. She had self-control and she was patient. She understood the importance of timing and she never seemed to be in a big hurry. I think that's a good example to follow. We are in a culture that values busyness and hurry and going here and going there, and somehow our value is determined by how busy we are. If somebody looks at you and says, what are you doing this weekend? And you say nothing, you're like, nothing? Nothing? You're not going to do anything? Nope. I got no plans this weekend, and I'm like tickled pink about it. Slow down, take a breath, relax, understand the importance of timing. Come to be known as somebody who knows how to keep a secret, who knows when to talk and who knows when to stop talking, and knows how to be a good confidant. Next, Esther had a continually teachable spirit. Still further down in chapter 2 of Esther, we read this about her. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done while under his care. Even after becoming the favorite among the harem women and capturing the attention of her overseers and eventually becoming queen, Esther never assumed she had arrived and needed no further teaching. She never got that know-it-all attitude. Sometimes as we get elevated in our jobs or whatever the context might be, it's sometimes easy to slide into, I don't really need you to tell me what to do anymore because I've kind of been doing this for a long time and now I know it all. But the older I get, the more it becomes true and true. You don't know what you don't know. And the older I get, the longer that list grows. Never lose your ability to become teachable. Esther was always willing to listen and learn. She listened to Haggai, her overseer, when he told her, this is what you need to eat, this is what you need to drink, this is what you need to wear, this is what you need to do. She listened and she learned. She listened to Mordecai even after becoming a member of the king's palace. just as she had always done while growing up under his care. Never get so old or so full of yourself that you're no longer willing to listen and learn and be taught. Number 4, Esther displayed a humble respect for authority. And still, in chapter 2 of Esther, we read this about her. The king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet. That king always giving banquets. He liked them. For all his princes and servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces. A holiday. What do you do on the holidays? The king drank, but anyway. And he gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done while under his care. And sometimes I think as young people, talking to our graduates today, we can't wait for the day where we can be out from under mom and dad's rules or whoever's raising us up. We're going to make our own rules. We don't have to do it your way anymore. We're going to make our own decisions. I was that way. I think it's kind of a rite of passage. You want to grow up and start establishing the rules for your life. But I made some kind of dumb decisions when I first started doing that. But we see in these verses that Esther never lost that humble respect for authority. She continued to listen to Mordecai when he told her to do something, just as she had always done. She obeyed her overseers, and it was just this humble respect for authority. It's admirable, and I think we would do well to copy that. Number 5, Esther understood the power of prayer and the power of the God she served. We read this one last time about the characteristics of Esther. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it's against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." Above everything that we've talked about this morning, all the wonderful characteristics and qualities of Esther, this, above all else, was her secret to success. She knew where her strength and her power and her wisdom came from. She knew she wasn't strong enough, graceful enough, winsome enough, humble enough, or pretty enough to accomplish the goal and the occasion that was standing right in front of her, to approach the king and save her people. Esther had a legacy of faith that Mordecai had given her. He had taught her about the God of heaven and how he cared for them and loved them. And Esther remembered those words when she faced the biggest risk of her life that could cost her life, when she needed to go talk to the king without being invited to do so. She went to the right place at the right time when she knew she needed strength and wisdom beyond her own ability. I love Esther. I love everything about her. I want to be a little bit like Esther. I don't want to be carried off to a harem anywhere, but other than that, I kind of want to be like Esther. Wouldn't you? I don't know why you wouldn't want to have those characteristics in your life. So I'm going to give you 2 quick takeaways here this morning, how you can be a little bit more like Esther. Okay, number 1, ask God to cultivate character within you. Just ask God to give you those character qualities and distinctives that you don't have. Ask him to help you focus more on the internal than the external things, which we spend so much time, effort, and money chasing after. Ask him to give you the grace and the winsomeness and the self-control you don't currently have. Ask him to help you to be the kind of person that other people just want to be around. They're like, there's nothing worse than a cranky old Christian. Like, it's the worst. Who wants to be around cranky old anybody? But don't be cranky and say you are a Jesus follower. Just don't do that. That's horrible. All right? Don't do it. God wants your character to look daily more and more and more like his. So ask him for it. It's a prayer he wants to answer. Esther did it boldly and confidently, so ask him boldly and confidently. And number 2, takeaway today, trust God to work despite your circumstances. Our circumstances, like Esther's, are never going to be perfect. Sometimes they will be downright horrific and horrible. But God always works in the midst of our circumstances. Remain humble in your circumstances. Remain faithful in your circumstances. Remain teachable in your circumstances. Use restraint and self-control in your circumstances. But above everything else, pray in your circumstances. At a very critical juncture in this story, Esther tells Mordecai about her plan to approach the king uninvited, and she says, "If I must die, I must die." I think we can agree that's a heroic comment. Esther was willing to die to save her people. In Matthew 26, we find these words of Jesus: "Father, if it be possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Give me the grace just for a second to paraphrase Jesus' prayer just for a minute. Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet if I must die, I must die. Jesus prayed those words just hours before he was going to be betrayed and beaten and murdered and hung on the cross to have the most painful, torturous agony imaginable. And he knew it. He knew what lay ahead of him. But he says to his Father, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup be taken from me. But if I must die, I must die." Esther didn't have to die, but Jesus did. And he did it willingly because he knew his death was going to be the only means of our salvation. His death wasn't going to just save the Jewish people. His death was going to save all of humanity for all of time, for anyone willing to call on his name and say, "Lord, help me." Esther was a hero. She was willing to die for her people. She didn't have to do it. Jesus willingly died for his people. He is our ultimate hero. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the example of Esther. Thank you for being with us in our circumstances. And Lord, for anybody here today in the midst of circumstances that are crushing, Lord, help them to turn to you. You are so faithful and kind and gracious. So we're going to trust you to work it out. We're going to praise you in the storm. In your name, amen.